The sky over Larkridge County was still waking when Ethan Cole guided his dusty sedan along the empty rural highway. Pale ribbons of sunlight stretched across the road like fragile promises, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind swirled with the chaos he had tried to outrun, weeks of doubt, nights of tension, and the quiet betrayal that had finally pushed him to leave the city behind. The quiet of the countryside felt foreign, almost suspiciously calm. His peace lasted exactly 12 minutes. A sharp, commanding wail tore through the stillness. Red and blue lights burst to life behind him, strobing across his rearview mirror like an accusation. Ethan's chest tightened as he pulled onto the gravel shoulder. He knew he hadn't been speeding. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. And yet, dread crawled steadily up his spine. The sheriff's truck stopped behind him with a decisive crunch of tires. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, hat shadowing his eyes but not the severity etched into his jawline. Sheriff Mason Hale, the kind of lawman whose presence alone could silence a crowded room. He approached with unwavering authority, every step deliberate. "Hands where I can see them," Mason commanded. Ethan obeyed instantly, pressing his palms to the steering wheel. "Officer, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" Mason didn't answer at first. His eyes scanned the car with sharp precision, as if he expected danger to leap out at him. Finally, he said, "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for. I need you to step out of the vehicle." Ethan's heartbeat stumbled. "A suspect? I'm just passing through. My name is Ethan Cole. I can show you my—" "Step out," Mason repeated, voice firm but controlled. Ethan swallowed hard and complied. The ground felt unsteady beneath him as the sheriff guided him toward the back of the car. Mason's gloved hands briefly brushed Ethan's arm, a professional touch, but unexpectedly gentle beneath the armor of authority. It only deepened Ethan's confusion. "I really think there's been a mistake," Ethan whispered. Mason examined his face, searching for something: fear, guilt, deceit. Instead, he found exhaustion. Real exhaustion, the kind carried by someone running from emotional wreckage rather than crime. Still, he kept his tone guarded. "Where are you headed?" "North," Ethan answered. "Trying to get away for a while." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Away from what?" Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't planned on sharing anything personal, especially not with a stranger who had just ordered him out of his car. But the question struck directly at the ache he had been trying to escape. His voice wavered before he steadied it. "From someone who stopped being honest with me." Mason said nothing, yet something shifted in his expression, so subtle, so fleeting, Ethan might have imagined it. A flicker of recognition, perhaps. A private wound responding to another. "Let me see your bag," Mason instructed. Nodding toward the passenger seat, Ethan retrieved it carefully, keeping his movements slow. As he lifted the strap over his shoulder, the sheriff's radio slipped from its clip on Mason's belt and fell into the dirt with a dull thud. Mason cursed under his breath and bent down to pick it up, but Ethan reached it first. He wiped the dust off gently and held it out. "Here," he said softly. "Didn't mean to startle you." For a split second, the sheriff hesitated. His gaze lingered on Ethan's extended hand, steady, unthreatening, unexpectedly considerate. That single gesture, simple, instinctive, disturbed the rigid certainty Mason had built around himself. It was the kind of small moment that said more about a man's character than any document or explanation could. "Thanks," Mason murmured, his voice losing a fraction of its edge. He took the radio, but his grip faltered for the first time since he'd stepped out of the truck. Ethan noticed. Mason noticed Ethan noticing. The air thickened with an unspoken question neither dared to address. The sheriff cleared his throat abruptly. "I'm taking you to the station for verification. Standard procedure." Ethan nodded, though anxiety pressed against his ribs. He could only hope reason would win out somehow. As Mason guided him toward the patrol truck, the early sunlight caught Ethan's face, illuminating the quiet hurt he carried like a shadow. Mason saw it, and something about that sorrow pulled at him, tugging at parts of himself he usually kept locked away. He looked away quickly, but not before a single thought unsettled him. this man doesn't feel like a criminal." The truck door closed with a heavy click, leaving both men caught in a moment neither fully understood, one that demanded answers, and one that promised a story far from over. The sheriff's office in Larkridge County was small enough that every sound carried, every shuffled step, every rustle of paper, every quiet exhale. Ethan Cole sat in a wooden chair inside a modest interrogation room, its single window letting in muted daylight. The room felt neither threatening nor comforting, it simply existed, waiting for truth to fill the silence. Across from him, Sheriff Mason Hale reviewed a stack of reports with a furrow etched deeply between his brows. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't stalling. He was simply thinking, and for Mason, thinking often meant wrestling with more than just facts. Ethan watched the sheriff quietly, trying to decipher the man behind the badge. Mason carried himself with a controlled restraint, but every so often, something softer slipped through, an indecipherable warmth he quickly tucked away. When Mason finally looked up, his tone had shifted. Not warm, but no longer accusing. "Let's start simple," he said. "Tell me why you're on this road. And don't give me the short version." Ethan exhaled slowly. He hadn't expected honesty to be the next step, not with cuffs almost being a possibility an hour ago. But something about Mason, the steadiness in his gaze, the sincerity behind the sternness, felt unexpectedly safe. "I left home this morning," Ethan began. "Not because I'm running from anything criminal. I left because I needed distance." His fingers intertwined tightly. "Distance from someone who stopped treating me like a partner." Mason didn't interrupt. He leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under his solid frame. It was the closest thing to encouragement Ethan had received since being pulled over. "My boyfriend, Daniel," Ethan continued. "We were together for 3 years, and I really believed we were building something honest." He paused, forcing steadiness into his voice. But he kept pulling away. Late nights, unexplained messages. He always had an excuse. And when I confronted him, he called me paranoid. A shadow crossed Mason's expression, subtle but unmistakable. He knew that feeling, being dismissed when your instincts screamed otherwise. "I wasn't paranoid," Ethan said quietly. "I was just the last to see the truth." Mason folded his hands, elbows resting on the table. "Did he cheat on you?" Emotionally, Ethan replied. "Maybe more. I never caught him physically, but his loyalty was already gone. His apologies felt rehearsed. His promises felt borrowed." Ethan shook his head, eyes cast downward. "So I packed a bag and left before he could pretend again." The room held a moment of heavy quiet. Mason's voice, when it came, was lower than before. "I'm sorry." He rarely offered personal sympathy in uniform, but Ethan's vulnerability struck a chord too familiar to ignore. Ethan studied the sheriff's face. "Have you ever had someone break your trust?" The question pierced deeper than Ethan intended. Mason's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in memory. He didn't look away. "Once," he admitted. "But the truth is, I broke his trust first." Ethan blinked, surprised by the confession. Mason continued carefully, as though choosing each word mattered. "His name was Ryan. We were close. Too close for the town to understand." He hesitated, swallowing the bitterness of old regrets. "I ended things because I was afraid of what being honest would cost me. My badge. My reputation. My family." His voice thinned. "I convinced myself it was the right decision. But I lied. To him, and to myself." Ethan said nothing, but in his eyes, Mason didn't see judgment, only empathy. "That's why I reacted the way I did on the road," Mason added. "I've learned that fear makes people hide. And hiding makes you suspicious of everything." Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe we're both running from something." "Maybe," Mason agreed. He reached for another report, intent on confirming Ethan's identity, but the earlier tension between them had softened into something quieter, an unexpected recognition of two men wounded by different versions of the same truth. A knock on the door interrupted them. Deputy Alvarez handed Mason an updated bulletin. Mason scanned it quickly. His brows lifted in surprise, then relief. "The suspect we were looking for," Mason said, meeting Ethan's eyes. "He was arrested 20 miles from here. Matches the description exactly." Ethan inhaled sharply, relief mixing with exhaustion. "So? I'm not in trouble." "No," Mason said firmly. "You're not." Ethan's shoulders sagged as tension finally released, but Mason didn't stand. He didn't move to open the door. Instead, he remained seated, studying Ethan with a new awareness. The kind that acknowledged more than innocence or guilt. The kind that wondered what would happen next. "Ethan," Mason said quietly, "now that we know you're not the man we're after, we should talk about what comes next." The words hung between them, an invitation wrapped in uncertainty, promising that the story was far from finished. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of the sheriff's office, casting warm stripes across the floor as Ethan Cole followed Sheriff Mason Hale out of the interrogation room. The tension that had once clung to every wall now felt thinner, lighter, no longer shaped by suspicion but by the delicate awareness forming between them. Ethan carried his small travel bag in one hand, its weight suddenly insignificant now that he was free to leave. Mason closed the file on his desk and looked up. "Before you go, I want to apologize again," he said, voice steady but edged with sincerity. "I misjudged you. That's on me." Ethan offered a soft smile. "Given the situation, I can't blame you for being cautious. I just didn't expect today to go the way it did." "Neither did I," Mason replied, and though his tone remained calm, something unspoken lingered beneath the words, something neither of them knew how to name yet. The sheriff extended Ethan's license and belongings. Ethan reached for them, and their fingers brushed briefly. Neither man pulled away immediately. The contact wasn't dramatic or prolonged, just a quiet reminder of how differently the day could have unfolded. Mason cleared his throat gently and stepped back to create space. "There's a diner across the street. You should get something to eat before you continue your trip." Ethan hesitated. "I might stay a little longer," he admitted. "At least until I figure out what I'm doing next." His honesty surprised both of them. Mason's gaze softened. "Larkridge is peaceful. Sometimes too peaceful. But you're welcome to rest here as long as you need." Ethan nodded, though a small uncertainty tugged at him. "I'm not sure what I'm running toward anymore." Mason studied him carefully. "Maybe you're not running. Maybe you're giving yourself a chance to breathe." The words sank into Ethan like much-needed reassurance. For the first time since leaving Daniel, he felt something loosening inside him, like a knot coming undone stitch by stitch. They stepped outside into the open air, where the day had settled into a golden stillness. The sheriff's truck sat nearby, dust settling over it from the long hours on the rural roads. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was receptive, almost contemplative. "You mentioned earlier that your boyfriend broke your trust," Mason said carefully, standing beside Ethan near the station steps. "I don't know the details, but I do know what it feels like when someone you choose doesn't choose you back. It's disorienting." Ethan looked at Mason, surprised by his willingness to relate. "It wasn't just what Daniel did," Ethan said. "It was the way he made me question my sanity, my instincts, even my worth. I kept telling myself I was imagining things because that was easier than facing the truth." "That's a kind of heartbreak people don't talk about," Mason replied quietly. "When you lose trust in yourself along the way." Ethan's voice softened. "Did that happen with Ryan?" Mason inhaled slowly. "In a different way. I hurt him because I was afraid. I convinced myself I had to choose between being truthful and being accepted. And by trying to protect my life, I damaged his. I've lived with that choice longer than I expected." Ethan listened, not with pity, but with genuine understanding. "Fear can make people do the wrong things," Ethan said. "But regret doesn't have to define the rest of your life." Mason's gaze lifted toward him, grateful yet conflicted. Ethan's presence stirred something dormant, hope mixed with caution. He didn't want to project meaning where there was none, but he couldn't ignore the quiet gravity pulling them closer. A breeze passed, carrying the scent of pine and fresh dirt from the nearby fields. Ethan shifted his bag. "Do you think," he asked slowly, "that two people who barely know each other can still understand each other, more than they expect to?" Mason's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Sometimes understanding doesn't come from time. It comes from honesty." Ethan absorbed the words, feeling them settle deep inside. Mason hesitated, then said, "If you're not leaving tonight, maybe we could talk again. Off duty. Nothing formal." The invitation was simple, but its significance landed with quiet resonance. Ethan nodded. "I'd like that." The sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the ground, signaling the end of a day that began with suspicion and ended with something fragile, hopeful, and profoundly unexpected. As Ethan walked toward the diner, he glanced back once. Mason was still standing outside the station, watching, not with authority, but with possibility. A possibility neither of them had anticipated, but neither was willing to ignore.